In a previous video, we went over the wacky world of flip effect monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! But as we went down all the potential choices, we realized that the topic was so thick, it could not be contained in a solitary list. So here's another volume of us looking at the weirdest flip monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! To quickly summarize what a flip effect monster is, you set it face down, and then its effect activates when it's flipped face up, either via battle, card effect, or just flipping it manually on your turn. What makes these cards weird is usually an effect that's weak or convoluted, or just confuses us for a second before we say, oh, I get it. They could also just make this list because of their appearance. We love a good goof on the artwork here, and by we, I mean I'll be joined by some co-hosts, being Sam from the Dungeon Dive Bar podcast.
Hello.
Professor Oats.
Hello, card games.
Professional trained duelist SyzygySolo.
Waves hand.
And for mild comic relief and viewer demand, Judgment Meter.
That's me! We're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh!
What kind of Yu-Gi-Oh?
Cards.
Now, let's reverse card open our top 10 weirdest Yu-Gi-Oh! Flip Monsters Volume 2. Number 10, the Stern Mystic. The Stern Mystic always felt like a practice flip effect monster. Like it shows us that an effect can activate, but the effect basically does nothing. When flipped, it lets you look at all the set cards on your opponent's side of the field, and that's about it. You put them back face down as if no one ever touched them. Part of it feels like it's just an effect for the sake of having an effect, but you also have to look at the context of when he came out to understand that he's okay. He was released in the early stages of the game, when your only options were really just to summon a monster in attack mode or set it in defense mode and maybe put up some back row, so you would likely have some things to look at by the time the Stern Mystic was ready to be flipped. Who knows, maybe you'll find your opponent's mirror force so you won't have to waste your mystical space typhoon on a bluff.
You just get to look at it? That's it? Well, I mean, there's a spooky thing down there. I don't know, what is it? Oh, it's a bite shoes. I better play around that. Like, I get where they're coming from, but...
Listen, that Mirror Force Turbo, or Bait Doll. Bum bum bum.
Bait Doll is actually kind of good.
Yeah.
I like Bait Doll.
The only way to really maximize his value is setting him early in the duel, getting lucky where your opponent doesn't attack into him and sets a bunch of cards instead, and then you flip him on your next turn and boom, now you know all their back row and set cards. Hopefully you have something to deal with all those set cards you just learned about, or else, good luck. The Stern Mystic's underpowered effect was consistent with other cards at the time that only let you look at set cards or your opponent's hand, like Seal of the Ancients or Eye of Truth, where they let you see the unknown cards, but they didn't help you deal with them. For these types of effects to be widely used, there usually needed to be a bonus effect for looking at your opponent's cards that helped you deal with their pending threats, like how Swords of Revealing Light flipped the opponent's monsters and prevented them from attacking, or cards like Confiscation or Trap Dust Shoot let you look at your opponent's hands and get rid of one of their cards. There were just better effects out there than the Stern Mystic that let you look at your opponent's cards. Or, you could just get the Millennium Eye, and then you can look at your opponent's back row for free, which is possible with a Duel Link skill. At the very least, the Stern Mystic looks cool if you're a fan of that classic fantasy design. He looks like someone I could ask questions to about ancient magic, but then I'd be afraid that he'd live up to the adjective in his name and answer those questions too harshly.
He's stern. He's a mystic. He's bad. He's got cool glasses. This is me in like 50 years, where I've decided to actually grow out my beard and get a cane for me to bap children on the head with.
His staff is a seashell.
And you've got a necklace of Konami orbs.
Listen, I like a good orb.
If it wasn't for all his mystical garb, I would just say he could pass for a standard elderly school teacher.
He, just got out of proctoring a final exam for physics.
Number 9, Reaper of the Cards. Reaper of the Cards was included in the first batch of effect monsters, most of which were flip effect anyway, and he may have been the worst one. Not so much for his effect, but for his level. Its effect was just that it destroys a trap card when it's flipped, and if you target a set card to destroy it, you can look at the card to confirm if it's a spell or trap. If it's a spell, just set it back down as if nothing happened. But because Reaper was a level 5 monster, he had the same issue that we discussed in our Noble Maneater bug segment in the previous video, where the only feasible way you could get him on the field at this point in the game was to tribute a monster to set him.
And they're just like, what if we just introduce the tribute set mechanic ASAP? Surely this will do good things. And sure enough, it didn't. And they also gave him 1930 defense, which is perfect for when I no longer like doing math in my head.
Panic? Why do you do this this with all of your monster stats. First we had Barox, then Castle of Dark Illusions, and now this.
My favorite thing about Reaper of the Cards is there are 2 cards that do what he does with a lot less effort. Both Crimson Ninja and Trapmaster do the exact same thing, but neither of them are tribute monsters.
Hey, we're printing another card. What effect do you want to give it? You want to do one at that check for trap thing again? Oh yeah, greatest hits, let's do it.
And with most early traps not being continuous, you almost always have to blindly target a set card to attempt to resolve this effect. The other letdown about this guy is he was hyped up in the episode prior to his card appearance in the anime, where he was a literal Reaper who took the souls of monsters to somewhere, but the point is, if you got destroyed in battle, then you were destroyed for real. I feel like a better effect for him would be where he could banish a card from the graveyard instead, or something like that, showing how he takes monsters' souls after they're sent to the graveyard. Even so, the anime hyped up his card effect to be better than it was in real life too. It's a normal effect where he doesn't need to be flipped, and he can just destroy any back row with his scythe. However, when he was blindly going for Swords of Revealing Light in the anime, he instead hit Spellbinding Circle and was immediately stopped. Ironically, his real-life effect would have worked here since real-life Spellbinding Circle only stops monsters from attacking and doesn't negate their effects. Alas, even with a better effect in the anime, Reaper still found a way to get screwed over by Duelist Kingdom rules. Spellbinding Circle just kinda did whatever it wanted to back in the day. It was the Deus Ex Machina of stopping everything. Number 8. Pot of the Forbidden. This is a combination of the pot and jar archetypes that we discussed in the previous flip video, where jar is the infamous archetype where you flip the monsters for varying disruptive effects, and pots are the spells that let you draw more cards. And then there's also the trap jar archetype, which is more just tangentially related. Both these archetypes have cards that are either comedically underpowered or insanely overpowered to a point where some of them have been put on the ban list and are still banned to this day. Pot of the Forbidden keeps the flavor of the jar monsters by having it be a flip monster, and the scent of Pot of Greed, where when you flip Pot of the Forbidden for its effect, you get to pick from one of 4 effects that go with the Pot of Greed shenanigans. The first effect is simply Pot of Greed's effect, letting you draw 2 cards unrestricted, but the other 3 effects are not from Pot spells, but rather other spells that were forbidden on the ban list, like Pot of Greed. The second effect lets you return all spells and traps on the field to the hand, like Giant Trunade, and the third effect lets you look at your opponent's hand and return one of those cards to their deck, like the Forceful Sentry. Wait, I forgot to mention its effect that destroys all your opponent's monsters. He has that too. This is based on Regeki, which was banned, but now that card's unlimited, so my mind was like, you can forget about this one. Didn't mean to, sorry. It's like they were trying to show us that these pretty busted effects can actually work if they're tied to a big flip monster, even though they already showed us that they can work if the effect is heavily restricted or just has a big activation cost. It's important to note that Pot of the Forbidden's level is too high to just set without tributing or using an alternate method of setting it, so it's not as simple as just set and pass to get it on the field to pull off its effect. I'm not sure if this card was any useful ever, but I think it's cool how they combined the 2 notable archetypes based on pottery with faces. It seems like a natural crossover that I was just never expecting that turned out to be the final boss of Yu-Gi-Oh! Jars, also the scariest looking of the jars.
I want to put my hand in there. I'm putting my hand in there, and no one will stop me.
I want to scoop the eye out and slurp it like a boba. Just...
Why do you guys want to constantly eat the monsters in these videos?
I just need to know what's so forbidden that I can't stick my hand in there. I am dead set on sticking my hand in multiple Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters and spells and traps, but this is like number 1 on that list, right before like potato and chips.
I want to stick my hand in Gruesome Goo.
Oh yeah, the Gruesome Goo. You bring up a solid, the Gradle archetype. I want to just squish them.
But Pot of the Forbidden is still your number 1?
I feel like you shouldn't stick your hand in there.
I'm putting my hand in it. You cannot stop me.
Why? Don't stick your hand in a hole that you don't know where it goes. But then I figured, okay, all holes are a goal. All holes can be a goal. You're all winners.
Left Arm Offering has nothing on this.
Number 7, Big Eye. Big Eye is a deceivingly above average card considering when it came out. When flipped, you can use Big Eye's Big Eye to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and then rearrange them in any order you want. In today's game, having having to wait a turn to rearrange some cards and then wait another turn after that to choose your next draw is too slow, especially with how many cards shuffle your deck, making Big Eye's effect null and void. However, in early Yu-Gi-Oh!, the pace of the game was slow enough where manipulating your next draw could turn the game around, and there were less cards that forced you to shuffle your deck, so that reordering was more likely to stick. And there were cards that benefited from you knowing the top card of your deck, like Reversal Quiz.
It can be used in conjunction with the true name, which, if you guess the top card of your deck right, add an Egyptian god card to your hand.
This is definitely the first of the know what's in your deck to synergize with the guess what's in your deck cards.
Except the guess what's in your deck cards came out like 6 years later or even longer.
I know, but this was the Proto-Sylvan and the Proto-Reverse Vampire, I think.
Yes, this is the reverse vampire.
The Proto-Reverse Vampire.
Though Big Eye's effect just feels laughably slow in the modern game compared to cards we have now that let you look at the top cards of your deck and actually take one of them, or other cards that we have that let you look at the top cards of your deck as a secondary effect, like Dark Magical Circle. This card lets you search, banish, and look at the top card of your deck. Sign me up. Actually don't. I don't feel like playing a Dark Magician deck. Even Gishki Chain outpaces Big Eye. Looking at the top card of your deck now is more just a bonus effect to another effect being activated, rather than being the full effect itself. Outside of his effect, Big Eye also has the extra weird factor of his name being a victim of localization renaming. His Japanese name translated to Big King Eyeball, and then they just removed some of those words in his English name to create Big Eye. Like, Big King Eyeball makes sense. He's the king of eyeballs. That's why he has so many of them. But just calling him Big Eye, I don't know, it sounds like you're trying to single out one of the eyes.
Which is the big eye? I mean, they're all big eyes. They're larger than the average eye. Is it the biggest eye? Is it just any eye that is big? Which one is the monster?
You don't understand. The big isn't actually talking about its eyes. It's talking about his traps. Look at how lack of a neck he has. That guy works out so much.
I figured out why he's so ripped. Because to close all the eyes, he has to flex.
What if his name is Eye? And it's like, oh yeah, that's Big Eye over there.
Okay, no. You cannot say this is his name, but be mad that Don Zalug is not a name.
No, Big is his moniker. Eye is his name. Bigglesworth Ivan. But Ivan's spelled very wrong.
I feel like he was supposed to be a Cyclops, and then the artist was like, you know, what's better than a Cyclops? Cyclops with like 10 eyes and rockin' abs and claws.
There's actually at least 14 eyes, not 10.
You know what? It's hard to count.
So is the curved eye right there, is that a collarbone? Is that a mouth? Is that a slightly closed eye that when opened is the biggest eye? I kind of like the smiley face. I like it it's smiling. It could also be frowning. That could be the frown.
It also doesn't help that his localized name is the real name of a later card, number 11, Big Eye, whose name is Big Eye in Japanese and English and is a much better card. So Big Eye is not even the best Big Eye in English. At least in Japanese, he can take solace in the fact that he's a king, a big king. Does that also imply that there's a small king eyeball? If so, would that be Hero's Shadow Scout or the purple guy? Number 6, Des Feral Imp. This one is here mostly because of what card it evolved from and its localization. First off, the effect is fine. It's a very restricted version of the Transmigration Prophecy trap card, where when Des Feral Imp is flipped, you can put a monster from your graveyard back into the deck. It's okay.
I love how his effect was good when he was released because you could recycle cards, but now his effect is bad because you want cards in the graveyard more than you want them in your deck.
However, the main reason he's here is the fact that he's a card evolution. As the name implies, there's a normal Feral Imp, and it's just a standard non-effect monster. So I'm not sure what made Konami think that when Feral Imp evolves, it should get a graveyard recovery effect, and be a flip monster, and be a reptile. Actually, the reptile makes sense. The reason Feral Imp evolves into this creature is because its Japanese name is actually Gremlin, in reference to the movie Gremlins. Gremlins start off as these fluffy little creatures called Mogwai that multiply when you get them wet, and then turn into these green reptilian demon things when you feed feed them after midnight, so I guess Feral Imp, aka Gremlin, is just going through the natural changes that come with feeding him after midnight.
I just think the fact that he loses his wings to just be edgier is a lot funny to me.
I love Des Feral Imp because it is once again a member of the Death group, because Konami's afraid to print the word death.
And that's consistent with his Japanese name, where Des Feral Imp is called Death Gremlin.
Honestly, with the censoring of Destiny board, I'm surprised this wasn't Final Feral Imp.
Des Feral Imp got one more evolution with King of the Feral Imps, which had an unrelated effect as a reptile support card, so however many years later, he's still going all in with the reptile theming. Since they had to stick with the localization name, we did not get the fun name that he had in Japanese of King Gremlin as one word. That's cute. He even has some kids that are like chibi Death Gremlins. I wonder if they were planning a full archetype and it just never got made, or if someone splashed him with water.
Oh my god, he has babies. Oh, he has babies. Okay, he's my favorite. Okay, this is an acceptable evolution. I want those little furry plushies.
But you already have 28 plushies.
Now I have 29.
I'm so confused. Des Feral Imp and King of Feral Imps are both reptiles. Feral Imp is not. King of Feral Imps is unable to search Feral Imp. Not much of a king. I don't have many thoughts on Des Feral Imp, but the two imps on the side of it, I have thoughts on that.
I like that if you look closely, his mouth is open. He's going, hey, you want an axe to spare?
Number 5, Summoner of Illusions. This card is here mostly just for the appearance, because every time I look at it, I get distracted by something I never noticed before. First off, its effect. When flipped, you contribute one other monster and special summon a fusion monster from the extra deck, but it gets destroyed at the end of the turn. Honestly, this was a pretty cool effect, and its main downfall is it was released only in the 5th TCG set Labyrinth of Nightmare, when the pool of fusion monsters available was pretty thin. Shortly after, we got more fusion monsters with effects like Ojama King, but still there were not many for him to choose from. You could still plan some fun little battle tricks when your opponent flips Summoner of Illusions on their turn, but he was ultimately outclassed by later fusion monster summoners like Cyberstein or Magical Scientist or even Instant Fusion. Regardless, Summoner of Illusions still would have been neat if he had the later fusion monster pool available to him. Imagine him with a card like Bloom Diva. Her effect that prevents destruction by card effects would nullify Summoner's trade-off where the monster needs to be destroyed at the end phase, since that counts as Summoner's effect, so she just gets to stay on the field for the rest of the duel. Hell, he could just bring out Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer and it will just revive the next turn. Even the concept that the fusion monster has to be destroyed goes with his theme that he's technically just summoning an illusion of the fusion monster whose form is temporary. That being said, the illusions that he's summoning in his card art are freaky, and this is a good kind of weird where they look cool, but man, it's still kinda creepy. First I was like, oh, what's he holding? Is that some sort of jewel that he needs to create the illusions, or oh god, he's putting together that green creature? And what's this material? Is that clay, or is that some type of otherworldly flesh? And holy crap, he's got more. Can these illusions hurt me because I don't feel safe with them looking at me like that?
Oh no. Big red chicken.
What about the last guy?
They look like those blobby monsters with the long names from 5Ds.
There's also an uncanny factor regarding his face. Someone once pointed out to me that his headwear looks like it could be flesh, and the face itself is actually a mask, and now I can't unsee that. I know it's just his normal face with a hat, but I'm a little skeptical that he may just be an illusion too. Number 4, Gem Turtle. Gem Turtle has always been weird to me since he's the only flip monster in his archetype. He's a part of the sub-archetype of the Gem Knights, a group of knight-shaped gems who fuse together to save the world and gain effects that destroy cards or shut down the battle phase or other fun stuff. But they also had 4 little gem buddies in their lore, and most of them were not important to the Gem Knight deck, and of course none of them were flip monsters except the turtle. I don't know, this card always just stood out to me. Its effect was, when flipped, it searches Gem Knight Fusion, which is a key spell card you need to fuse your Gem Knights faster. A big thing that made this weird to me was by the end of the Synchro era, when this card was released, flip monsters were less common, and if new flip monsters were released that were part of a bigger archetype, it was generally a full archetype that supported or protected the monsters that had to be set, and not just where one monster is a flip effect while the rest weren't. For context, various cards having flip effects in archetypes used to be common in many archetypes, where stronger effects were tied to flip monsters for the sake sake of balancing to slow them down, like Gravekeeper Spy or Batteryman Microcell. But once the pace of the game sped up with more search cards not needing to be flipped, like Stratos or even Harpy Queen, or spell card equivalents like Charge of the Light Brigade, having searchers that made you wait one turn felt out of date by 2011, even if it was searching a very good spell card.
Look at this turtle. I love this turtle. He's a funky design. He's got a gem shell. He's got a Konami orb on his head that represents like a kappa.
Exposed brain.
And he's just a funky dude trying to do his best. Unfortunately, what he does best is slow.
It doesn't get slower than a turtle that searches one card.
At least you can say he could be a big booty defender.
The same archetype has a 2100 defense monster that can be used for more than one fusion.
Oh.
Don't tell him that. It'll make him feel bad. That's hard for a turtle. He can't function upside down. Oh, my foot's asleep. Oh, God.
As a result, Gem Turtle was lesser used in Gem Knight decks, along with two of the other buddies, Merchant and Elephant, leaving Armadillo as the only little bunny to survive in the Gem Knight decks, who had a Stratos-like effect, where he could search any Gem Knight on summon. It was kinda funny how after cutting the other little buddies from the deck, you were just left with a deck of big ol' rock dudes, and then in the middle, you just had this little Armadillo doing his best. Number 3, Chewbone. When this card is flipped, you can summon 3 Chewbone Jr. tokens on your opponent's side of the field in defense mode, which are weak little guys with 100 attack and 300 defense. Despite that, there's nothing you can really do to take advantage of them compared to other cards that summon tokens on your opponent's side of the field, like with Black Garden. The tokens just kind of exist to block off your opponent's monster zones, but they forgot to add effects that make them hard to get rid of. Like if these had an Ojama Trio style effect, where the tokens couldn't be tributed and dealt damage, I'd understand it. But instead, these tokens were just free bodies that your opponent could use for tribute summoning, or as materials for synchro summoning and eventually link summoning. The only use I could see for these tokens is they block off monster zones for your opponent to Xyz summon, since tokens cannot be used for that type of summoning, and that was the era of summoning when this card was released. But as mentioned, they could still do things like synchro summon to get rid of them. Plus, there's plenty they can do for Xyz summoning with 2 monster zones available. Even if the tokens were effective in blocking off your opponent, there were still plenty of ways to clear the field or just clear Chewbone before it flips. And if you want to add salt to the wound, if the opponent has less than 3 monster zones available and Chewbone flips, it won't be able to resolve its effect since it has to be able to summon 3 tokens. It's not up to 3. You get all or nothing. Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be fun.
So hear me out. You flip up Chewbone. Then you summon Alistair the Invoker and make Invoked Purgatrio. And you chew on the Chewbone Juniors. I think that actually does 8,000 damage.
The main reason this card existed in the first place is because it was in the anime, but instead of summoning tokens in the anime, it just summons regular monster cards to your opponent's side of the field, still being Chewbone Jr. with the same stats, so your opponent could now Xyz summon with them too. Now that sounds terrible since it opens up the last summoning mechanic your opponent couldn't do with the token, but hear me out. The character using Chewbone had a very specific plan when dueling the main character Yuma.
And his strategy was to make the opponent summon a Baby Tyragon, so you could use an anti-Baby Tyragon card to pull an Xyz monster from the opponent's extra deck to his field, and he used it to steal number monsters.
And the only reason Yuma could summon Baby Tyragon in the first place is because he had the Chewbone Jr. cards on his side of the field to use as materials for an Xyz summon. Also, the opponent gifted Baby Tyragon to Yuma before the duel even started so he could enable all of this.
I've seen a Yu-Gi-Oh card with infinity attack, and that confuses me less than this.
Number 2, Invader of the Throne. This card was almost good. Well, I don't know about good, but it was almost not useless. When flipped, it lets you swap itself with one of your opponent's monsters. So they get this lady on a chair, and you get whatever they have. Hopefully they have a summoned skull up. However, this effect has the restriction that it can only be used during the battle phase, which is when a lot of early flip effects ended up being activated due to them getting flipped up from battle only. Without the restriction, if your opponent's monster has less attack than Invader's defense, they bump into her and boom, you get a free monster swap. But since she can't activate during the battle phase, instead she just gets flipped and you both sit there awkwardly. But she sits less awkwardly because she has a throne.
This one's explicitly like, you know the main time flip effects will activate? You can't activate it then. You have to set it, hope your opponent never touches it, and then you get a creature swap 2 turns later.
Well, you know, if there was a way to flip this up whenever you felt like it during the opponent's turn when they were we're trying to summon a big guy, this thing would be disgusting. This thing is amazing. But that card doesn't exist.
Prediction Princess Taro Tray.
So World Legacy Pawns and Prediction Princess, those make all of these cards a little bit better. So that was definitely a balanced choice because switching is powerful. But I think how it would work if that battle phase thing was removed is like, let's say an Opticlops is attacking in. It destroys her. And she says, switch control of it with this card. Wouldn't that not work because she's in the graveyard now and not on the field?
Correct. But 1700 at the time of her release was a good body.
I don't know why I love Opticlops. It could also be Opticlops. I don't know. I love it.
I mainly liked this card when I was younger because Random Vanilla Monster Protector of the Throne was one of my favorite cards for some reason, so I thought her evil counterpart must be even better because she has an effect and she's a super rare. But no, she just had marginally better stats and an effect that barely comes up. She also doesn't have an orb and can't form Guiltia like Protector can, so those are other disadvantages, I guess.
I like the flavor on this card. So it seems like she just waits for other monsters to go on lunch break and then sits in their chair, and she's just like, this is my chair now. Ha ha.
I feel like she photoshopped the background, so it might not be real. It might just be for likes.
Also, just want to point out that each of these monsters has insanely long hair.
Is that connected to the first hair, or is she just holding another thing of hair?
I think she's holding her extensions. Zoom and enhance. Nope, it's connected. Look. Oh, it's like some kind of Rapunzel situation.
She was tired of being locked in the tower, so when she got out, she wanted everyone's towers and the thrones therein.
For this pick, we chose a flip monster that supported a mechanic that is not very important unless you play a select few archetypes. Number 1, Immortal of Thunder. The Immortal of Thunder is a relic of old, when Konami thought effects that only do life point gain were beneficial, before players realized it was much better spending your life points on cards that would ultimately damage your opponent or prevent them from doing things. So with this being a card that only gains you life points and has a downside, he's never worth it. When flipped, the Immortal of Thunder increases your life points by 3,000, but when it leaves the field for the graveyard, you lose 5,000 life points. So you're essentially paying interest for borrowing those 3,000 life points with a net loss of 2,000 life points. And they make sure to say sent from the field to the graveyard, so if you tribute it or if it gets sent to the graveyard without being destroyed, you take that damage. Maybe you could get lucky where your opponent doesn't read the effect and hit you with a bottomless trap hole or a Hane Hane, but I don't see many people protecting their Immortal of Thunder for that long where they won't take the damage. More times than not, if you flip him, this card basically just says take 2,000 points of damage, and if your opponent has a card that destroys Thunder before he's flipped, he still goes from the field to the graveyard, but you don't get that 3,000 life point boost because he's never flipped, so you're just taking 5,000 points of damage with no benefit if that happens. Maybe you could do some sort of emergency provisions Mirage of Nightmare combo where you bounce him or banish him to avoid the downside of his effect, but it does seem like a lot of setup for a life point boost that you really don't need. In the end though, he'll probably just hurt you. Does he look like he's here to make friends?
Hello, the ding nabbit kids from getting off his gosh darn it lawn.
He's also missing a tooth.
He lost it in the war.
The funny thing is, someone at Konami must have really liked this guy because they gave him an upgraded form, the Ascended of Thunder, where his effect was somewhat inverted from the Immortal of Thunder. You can special summon this card by paying 3,000 life points instead of gaining them, and then when he's destroyed by your opponent's card, you gain 5,000 life points instead of losing them. So in the end, you could have a net gain of 2,000 life points instead of a net loss, though the opponent could just banish or bounce this card to prevent you from gaining, but still, he's significantly more useful even without the gain than the Immortal of Thunder was overall. Since he can special summon himself, he doesn't waste your normal summon like his original form, and paying life points for an extra summon is pretty common in the modern game, so it's not an unusual cost. 3,000 life points is a bit much when he doesn't do anything else other than help you gain life points, but still, it opens up new plays that the old Immortal of Thunder couldn't do since he wasted your normal summon and had to be set first. Finally, their names in Japanese have some wordplay with each other, with the Immortal of Thunder being called Kaminari Senin, meaning Thunder Hermit, and the Ascended of Thunder being called Kaminari Senjin, meaning Ancestor or God of Thunder. So I don't know if this is technically his upgrade, or him a few generations back being the Ancestor.
It's Shazam! Crossed over with Zeus! No. It's Kazam crossed over with Boomy.
Shazam. Regardless, with his original effect being more likely to harm than help, and his unexpected family legacy popping up, the Immortal of Thunder wins this round of Weird Flip Monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, what did you think? With another round of set cards flipped face up, who were your favorites, and which cards did we maybe leave at the bottom of the deck? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.